Mary Mulvey is going to go first. She's from Ecotourism Ireland. We've known each other for 30, 40 minutes and coordinated extensively during that time to make this presentation for you. But it's good to be here, and thanks for the invitation. So, Mary.
Thank you, Mark. And Mark is president of the World Ocean Foundation. And we hope between the two of us today that we'll just give you a bit of a whirlwind tool of where the travel industry is in sustainability. And it's way behind. It has a lot of catching up to do. But we hope we have a lot of inspiration and solutions of really good success stories around the world that are working, that you can hopefully integrate into some of your work. So I think this should be ready to go. I work for a very small non-profit, Ecotourism Ireland, that came out of a pilot project in Ireland from 2005 to 2009, and that was to bring an ecotourism project to a very small rural part of Ireland that had been affected by the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So it was a very poor, underdeveloped regional area. And the main purpose of that pilot was to look at standards, to look at product development, investment, and marketing. And in itself, it was a successful project, but it was, I suppose, the baby to the Ecotourism Ireland child in terms of we'd done all our learning and all our pilot project in training, in refining. Some of our most successful things were the simplest things, of letting tourist boards come on courses, letting communities be part of things, letting people who didn't know what eco was in 2005 in Ireland. And I suppose to give you some kind of context for Ireland, I'm hoping to go through globally what has happened in tourism and ecotourism, to do a little bit of a case study on Ireland and sustainability, to look at the green consumers of the future and what could happen in the next 5 years if what has happened in every other sustainable product happens, because tourism is a consumer product at the end of the day. And if everyone is living a green life, you need to ask yourself, why are you not going on a green holiday? And why are you not practicing what you preach when you spend your money and when you go to pick your holiday? And we were one of the first eco-certification labels in the world. And rather than going into all the details about certification, what I want you to go home with a message today is that good labels are now being certified by someone else. And they're saying what's good as such. And what has moved on hugely is what is in a label anymore. Up to 2, 3, 4 years ago, a label was just environmental criteria. So more than likely, any of the hotels you're staying in Austin aren't part of a certification scheme, are still giving you lots of little bottles, lots of cosmetics, giving you the odd sign for the towels, but that's it. They're not looking at the supply chain of the food. They're not looking at conservation. They're not looking at community. You know, Austin sounds better than most American destinations I've been in, but this is what is going to be universal in a few years' time. So it really has hugely, hugely moved on in terms of you as a customer, a tour operator, and a destination getting involved now. And there's a lot of progress really, really beginning to happen on the ground. Just to give some overall context about tourism, and it's I suppose why we're 20 years behind, in my opinion, in tourism compared to food, compared to forestry, maybe marine, compared to other sectors, is tourism is so complicated in most countries in the world that when you try and do something different, you say, well, we have to talk to maybe 20 agencies. The forestry people don't talk to the local authority. The tourist board talk to someone else. I'll never forget a study trip I had from West Virginia, came to Ireland, and we always thought we were bad with structures. They had 18 agencies in West Virginia dealing with tourism. So it's really hard to do anything in tourism. So these are some of the reasons why when you try to do things, they don't really work. You know, tourism also has been the safety card for most economies in the world. It's what we give to the third world to develop your economy. The World Bank went out and said this was the best thing to do. Tourism's always good. You don't hear too many arguments in most developed countries telling people tourism's bad. We shouldn't do it. There's actually a lot of bad things about tourism. So it's always been a good news story. It's always been a growth model. And, you know, no one shouts stop. You know, we've never said it cannot keep continuing. It's a little bit like a runaway train, but everyone still keeps thinking it's so good. It's good for everybody. But that is not actually the fact. The media are spectacularly bad at telling the bad stories about tourism and the damage tourism is doing, mainly because the media in tourism is funded by advertising, by the people who are doing a lot of the damage. So it'd be similar to, you know, the cruise industries, all these other industries. If you look at the pages in the New York Times and all the other travel media, I know someone done a master's in advertising, and she done it with 22 editors of newspapers, and they didn't want to hear about bad tourism because it affects their advertising budgets. Now, I know things have changed with social media and all that, but this is a book really worth looking at if you haven't seen it, Elizabeth Becker, where it looked globally in the whole world from an investigative journalist point of view. So it's not an academic read, it's real hard facts of the good, the bad and the ugly in tourism, and it's really, really up to date, and I'd really recommend. We were trying to get her to come here, but it didn't work out. But again, I think that kind of honest reporting hasn't happened, or I haven't seen it. This is a new organisation. You should be looking at this logo a lot more in the next 5 to 10 years in the world. It's the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and this is what is now going to certify the labels in the world as such. Came out of the UN. An amazing process in itself, just at consultation level, just at a process of bringing everyone in an industry together over 3 to 4 or 5 years, looking at all the standards, looking at everyone's role in that process, and really redefining what we want as a global tourism industry as such. It has looked at all of the pillars. So I was one of the first pilot projects to go through to get my label certified. So we have to put your label through that rigorous process with them. And what you will have then is we all will have the same label, a criteria of, you know, what measures, if you don't understand certification, it's a rule book like ISO, like other standards, what we're all being measured on. So you can now be assured a holiday in Ecotourism Ireland, Costa Rica, New Zealand are all on the same label, the same logo. It's going to be fed into the travel systems. It has a lot of credibility, so it's working with people who do the certifications for other big Rainforest Alliance, MSC, Fish, everything like that, that it's beyond the credibility of someone saying this isn't a credible organisation that are doing things. It has a CEO who understands the tourism industry, who understands how tourism works and how to deliver this type of product and market. And what has happened with a lot of projects for the last 10 or 12 years is people were doing it, not getting the product to market, and the actual visitor, consumer, not being able to find that type of holiday either and understand that you're going to get the same quality in all different countries as such. I really, really believe training has been the biggest weakness in the travel industry and the tourism industry, that people don't get opportunities to learn about sustainability. You know, they go on lots of marketing courses, digital courses, but no one goes to look at the future. No one goes to look at what could be coming down the track. You're aware of TripAdvisor have come up with their own program called Green Leaders. Totally ignored everyone in the tourism industry and travel industry. And this is, again, I'm not here to shoot, you know, messages or structures, but this is a perfect example of not working with something. You know, if 80,000 community were consulted in tourism, this is something that arrived 2 years later and just came up with its own way of doing things and just throws in the labels because we're there as well and stuff like that. But there is a lot of dangers, in my opinion, that other people are still really wanting to just do it for themselves rather than the whole industry. Travel Mole, if you haven't heard of it, is a very, very good online resource, news resource, UK-based, but does a lot of global stuff and has very good sustainability content and coverage. And Valer is a very outspoken Greek guy who wrote this. And, you know, we can't keep accepting everything is good all the time just because a big organisation does it. Do you know what I mean? It's not good enough when a lot of people are working at sustainability for a very, very long time. You know what I mean? Just to get that buy-in. But in defence of TripAdvisor, they have bought this really, really innovative small company called TripPod. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but it's a very simple concept. When you go to a region or destination, you want to connect with a local person, and that person becomes your reference guide and your tour guide while you're there. It's not that they physically bring you, but it's a reference. So when you go, you want to know what's the best pub, what's the best restaurant, and it's from a local perspective. So the tourist industry is realizing very smartly that people are looking for something different. And it may not be necessarily through a travel agent, that they're going to find out all their information from different sources. So this is proofed in some way like Airbnb, but it's a very smart concept, and the company was bought out there in May. Erica Harms was the CEO of the Global Sustainable Tourism Council during that whole process of bringing people together and trying to get consensus in the tourism industry. And her quote here really kind of does say it all, that, you know, tourism is very unlike other industries. It really, really is. There isn't a global overarching umbrella organization that is really looking at, you know, almost those issues of how to say no. In the past, you know, tourism was always seen as good. Do you know what I mean? Whereas now I think communities and underdeveloped people need to have criteria when a hotel comes. We all know of hotels and resorts that are in bad areas that have actually ruined the habitat that people were coming to see, and then they proudly say they're a certified hotel. So it belittles the purpose of certification. We need to look much, much broader at that. There's lots and lots of hope, so I want to give you lots of case studies and examples of countries that are doing it good. Costa Rica had been doing it really, really good, but I'm hearing in the last 2 years it is becoming a lot more developer-led, and that the real essence and spirit of what was going on maybe isn't still going on in Costa Rica. But if you're a sustainable tourism business in Costa Rica, the tourist board will bring you to all the green events, will give you lots and lots of extra promotion. They've done a social media campaign in America for $1 million, so people won green holidays. So as a tourist board, they probably are the best practice in terms of doing stuff. Slovenia, one of the new Eastern European countries, again, a very, very strong ministry, just put food, farming and agriculture all in the one building, built a green building, and just got it all right, got it all together, and just really looked at innovative ways of transport, communication, and, you know, more than just branding, putting something behind that brand and putting standards behind the brand. Lanzarote is one of the very small Canary Islands. An amazing artist called Cesar Manrique was very bolshy and come home and just said he didn't want his island to be ruined. And if you do go to Lanzarote, it's the only island in the Canaries that doesn't have high-rise tower blocks, doesn't cater to mass tourism, kept the rural vernacular architecture. New Zealand, Australia have done a lot of really, really good stuff. And the last project, Alpine Pearls, which is an amazing project which has won awards for the World Travel and Tourism Council. And it's 8 countries, very high alpine communities who want to bring people in after the ski season. But you can only come on a holiday if you come by car. You can only come if you don't use carbon. And it's working in 8 countries. It's really delivering business. And I was saying to Mark earlier, there probably wouldn't be a state that wouldn't work for in rural America if someone grasped it and ran that concept. But it has a standard, you know what I mean? The communities have to buy into it, and they have to deliver something really, really good. Anyone looking for real inspiration, the state of Queensland in New Zealand has been doing ecotourism plans for the last 20 years, and they put their money where their mouth is. They really, really invest. They invest in certification, they invest in training, and, you know, like all economies in the world, they've had lots and lots of challenges of government saying they're going into conservation areas, saying they're going to develop national parks and stuff like that. But on balance, they seem to have got the benefit of doing things right in terms of ecotourism development. Just as well to be aware, most of the work we would have done in Ecotourism Ireland was based on TIES, the International Ecotourism Society, so we took their international definition of ecotourism. But for the first time last year in Europe, 22 countries came together to come up with a European definition. And that was a fascinating process in itself. I'm going to these type of conferences in tourism since 2005. It was the first time since 2005 where we didn't have to talk about standards. Just get out of the room if you don't want to go this way. Do you know what I mean? That at least there's now a benchmark there for countries who want to do things. But the thing about Cesar Manrique also is to give people inspiration that sometimes the leadership may not come from tourism. It may come from a farmer. We changed environmental law in Ireland from a very small farmer who took a case against the Irish government who didn't want to build a big visitor centre in a national park. So you had your classic priest, a farmer, 4 or 5 academics who took a court case which changed environmental law in Ireland. So I think oftentimes we look to ourselves too much for all the solutions in tourism, that it's the people who love the place and are connected to it will make the difference. In terms of networks, the Coast Project in Cornwall is an amazing network of 700 businesses who put everything up on their website every day. I have 20 litres of oil. Can anyone recycle it for me? Can someone get me organic sheets? Does anyone know how to do this? Does anyone know how to do that? It's run as a social enterprise. And any of you can join online and be part of it and talk and forums. And like a lot of the work we've done is they've listened to small businesses and looked at their needs. And usually when you want to embrace eco or sustainability for small businesses, it's really, really important to solve the small things. Like when I would have started working in this sector, people are, well, where do you do the recycling? Where do you get the green detergent? Where do you get all the eco products that's going to help me move that business? Thankfully, the green economy has moved in terms of the supply side, where people now see there can be demand, that small bed and breakfast will look at organic food and look at how to supply them. You're probably more aware of community-based social marketing. Doug Mackenzie-Moore, an environmental psychologist from Canada, probably one of the best conferences I was ever at in this sector. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go to it on the morning because it was a business conference on marketing. But when I got there in the room, it's basically a platform to design all public awareness programs in the world. So it could be agriculture, it could be forestry, it could be conservation, it could be ranching. And you as a public servant share your successes. How did you do it? What worked? What didn't work? I was so inspired at the end of it, I went up to him and asked him, and how come you don't have a tourism section? And he said, because you're in the dark ages. So, we can learn a lot from all other programs that have worked. You know what I mean? Whether that is getting people to save energy, to save water, to save other things. The same psychology will work if you can communicate to a business that it's quite easy to do ecotourism. This is just an example. It's not coming out too well on the screen. In January, I was in Burma with a big eco operator, 12 people on the tour, and we were brought to an earthquake district. And essentially, there's about 5 foot of red sandstone clay there from the earthquake damage. But there was a lovely Buddha head inside that the tourists all felt they need to go in and take a picture. Now, I was just so horrified, do you know what I mean? Because this won't be there in a year or two, in any shape or form, this piece of architecture. Now, it does need restoring, it needs conservation, but our official tour guide never said anything, never done anything. He didn't actually come out on this visit. And the local tour guide said nothing. But out of the 12 people on my tour, I prevented 8 or 9 going in, just by saying, please don't go in, it's not going to be here. But it really annoyed me so much when I came home. I wrote the tour operators, but I wanted to share this reply from National Geographic. We have media all over the world featuring destinations, and they're assuming the tourists who are going are responsible, who know what they're doing, and are not causing damage. Now, on my tour, I conservatively would say 8 or 9 out of the 12 had MBAs. So they were smart, intelligent, educated people. But they still didn't feel their personal responsibility was really damaging that country. You know what I mean? Or damaging what they left behind in terms of their personal behaviour. So it was a big talking point that night. And we had a girl from the World Bank on the tour. And she was quite horrified that, you know what I mean, her organisation, again, sees tourism as good. But we never see the impacts. And the impacts that are caused not only by bad visitor management, but by tourists who don't know their impacts. Just to give you a very quick case study on Ireland, most people may be not aware, we're really a very new country. Ireland only gained its independence in the 1920s, so we've only been managing ourselves very new, but this is kind of a real twin dichotomy of tourism, that one of the earliest tourists who came to Ireland was Queen Victoria. She came by train, and that was the real origins of where the Adventure Conference is on in Killarney this weekend. That's what started tourism in Ireland. It was a royal visit. Now, it took a very, very long time for the next royal visit to happen. Do you know what I mean? And a lot of history in between. But the next queen, Queen Elizabeth, she chose what she wanted to come and see. And she picked artisan food, and she picked horse racing, and she picked all of the heritage and all of the culture. But ironically, glamping, I don't know if glamorous camping has taken off in your destinations, but I don't think we knew it was around then, that this fella put it up then for her to come and look at the scenery. And, you know, what has changed in that time? People still want to see scenery and food and go and do things when they're on a holiday. So I think, you know, sometimes we always think there's progress. Ireland, you may not know, we've lots of very unusual facts about Irish tourism, that we ended up being the consultants to a lot of the developing world, how to set up classification systems, how to set up duty-free at your airport. Irish coffee was invented one morning when people landed at a very cold, small little airport in Foynes in Limerick. But I believe we can continue to innovate and look at new ways of developing Ireland more sustainably. This is a renovated cottage here on the right, Knocksoon in the Gaelic language. We can come on a cultural holiday to learn how to make brown bread, to learn how to do music. So we can reinvent what we've done. People may not be aware, but Ireland lost our economic sovereignty, and we're run by the IMF and the World Banks and a few other people for a few years. And a lot of that was like the crash in every other country in the world, an overdependence on property, an inflated market. We built too many hotel beds. We built hotels in the wrong place. And we kind of got a little bit sloppy with tourism. We got very competitive, and tourism was no longer central to the economy and what happened. Construction was more important. High tech was more important. We have most of the American companies in Ireland now as employers. So we have bad stories that happened during all that. But what I think now has happened is people who never were in tourism have entered tourism now. So you have out-of-work designers, out-of-work techie people, people who don't come with different baggages about tourism in Ireland. But what has happened is a huge resurgence in the new type of Ireland we want. What are the values, what are the community aspects, and what do we want the visitors to experience when we come here? So there's a huge, huge mushrooming in social enterprise, in everything from up on the top there, green prescriptions, a project you can go to your doctor, he'll prescribe you to go walking or gardening. And the person from the health board has actually gone in lecturing doctors now. GIY, has anyone heard of it? Grow It Yourself, a new social enterprise, which teaches people at a local community level how to grow things. 600 new branches. It's gone to Australia, the Czech Republic and New Zealand. Fair trade towns, electric bikes, slow food. We have an electric bike network now of 5, 6, 7 operators who didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. Sea trails, slow food, slow cider. There's one city in Northern Ireland would have maybe 7 or 8 cider producers. Again, resurgence of traditional industries that would have been big in Ireland in the 1850s. We have an app, Ireland's Green app now, if you want to come. We're going to have a new organic whiskey. One of our main kind of rock concert venues, Slane Castle, has transformed the whole farm to be an organic farm, and you're going to have organic whiskey. So there's really, really exciting new products. And this was a new big strategic project by the government and by the tourist boards, how to bring people to rural Ireland, called the Wild Atlantic Way. And when this project began, like a lot of things in Ireland, we can be very good about talking about policy and not being very specific about what's going into things, and taking a while to really evaluate projects and bring them together. But in a way, sometimes it works to our favour that we're not so regimental, that we listen a little bit more, and that people, when they're consulted, really contribute. But this vision has changed in the last couple of months, and sustainability has now come through in it. And when we started looking at these projects, it's basically a touring coastal route. There's 3,000 beaches, 26 islands, 5 national parks. There's every conceivable tourism opportunity you would want to. But people were never actually moving from the south to the north. They were never considering going into these small rural communities. But now the message is, can you do it on a bike? Can you walk it? Can you do other ways of touring on the route? We're not asking you to go in the car. But if I showed you some of the earlier presentations, it was the car. And it took a lot of persuasion from a lot of us and a lot of communities on the ground. And in the last couple of months, the whole actual planning of the project has come to fruition. And now it's looking at the VICE model, which is the visitor experience, the industry, community, and environment. So again, you know what I mean? I think it's good for people to realize that no matter how projects start, finish, or evolve, you can influence them. You know what I mean? And I really would say that to people, that don't ever give up if you think things aren't going your way. People do listen, and sometimes they're looking for you to do the prodding and the nodding and to keep them on the straight and narrow. So this one really is going to be a strategic project that I think in sustainability can deliver for Ireland. This is a brochure here, the secrets of the Wild Atlantic Way, and for the first time now we have a page on ecotourism. There's a commitment to Leave No Trace. We brought Leave No Trace from America to Ireland 10 years ago. And, you know, it's again showing people that there can be something really, really special in your experience when you come. So in terms of strategically, the Tourist Board want this to be the must-do top experiences, you know what I mean, globally. And I think anything that people, if you haven't interacted with Irish people, when you do in a very small town in Ireland, you experience warmth, you experience people wanting to engage with you. And it's not just for tourists. They do it for Irish people too. And they're doing it in a lot of ways for their own enrichment. People are very, very curious about where people are from, where they've come, and why they want to visit their area. My pictures are coming out really, really dark here, but on Patrick's Day, our tourist boards all over the world have been lighting up all the iconic buildings of the world, everything from the Taj Mahal to Brazil, the Sydney Opera House, Cairo. Richard Branson even dyed his beard green, you know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? Everyone knows Ireland owns the word green, but as a government and as agencies, we haven't put out the green economy, the next message, that what green means, that it's more than just a filter on a light on a building on March 17th. Do you know what I mean? That we can do green all year round. But I think because of all the issues, I think I'm running over on Mark now, you know what I mean, that we haven't had a method to present our credentials on green. We're doing green now in agriculture, and we're doing green in lots and lots of other sectors. So I think the time now is right for people to be able to support credibility and sustainability issues in that level. Have you heard of the term conscious capitalism and conscious travel? This lady, Anna Pollock, is really, really worth checking out as well. And it's really just giving a different perspective of the type of credentials of an eco customer. There's also new research to say they're 4 times more loyal if they commit to you as a business. So I'll finish with that. This is Ben Bulben, a mountain near the region where I live. But just to say that, you know what I mean, every destination can embrace sustainability. There is now a process and a path to do it, and it just takes energy and encouragement and not compromise, but not presenting the worst story, not just asking about the carbon, not just asking about the worst green scenario, but just to make some change in that tourism product or destination. So thank you. And I've gone a little bit over here.
All right, so I'm from the Ocean Foundation, and so we're very focused on coastal resources, but that's fine when we're talking about travel and tourism, because almost 80% of all vacations involve a beach or a coral reef. And we're running out of coral reefs, and we're ruining our beaches. So we are, running through a resource that was there for a bargain that we didn't have to manage, we didn't have to maintain. Our organization is a public foundation. We work with many individual donors, corporate donors, government donors to do their philanthropy for them. And it just so happens that some of that philanthropy ends up relating to travel and tourism. We're very involved in what's called the Travelers Philanthropy Movement, which is trying to get more and more folks to do things that actually do give back to the destinations that they go to visit, rather than just handing a child who's trying to sell chiclets a dime. The ocean is the biggest, most dominant feature on our planet. It's something that we're all dependent upon. You've probably heard from Sylvia Earle and various others that 1 in 7 people rely on it for our protein every day. That's 1 billion people who eat fish every day. And if we go to 9 billion, we have a problem. That means we need as much fish as the entire population of the United States every day to be supplied. But most of us live on the coast, and most of our tourism is on the coast. And what we don't realize is that the tourism business, and it's not a single business, and that's part of the problem, right? We have airlines, we have hotels, we have buses, we have eco-tour operators, we have all-inclusive resorts. If you draw a box around all of those things, this is a gigantic industry, one that exceeds any other industry on the planet, including oil, and certainly exceeds oil when we talk about the number of people employed. Therefore, its potential to do bad and its potential to do good is huge. And by the way, Elizabeth Becker's book that Mary mentioned really tells that story, and really tells that story in an amazing, amazing way. I highly recommend it as well. A lot of our challenges with tourism relate to how it affects local economies and the environment, and introduces things that we don't want to be there. It's also something that, if climate change is causing sea level rise and storm surges, the very type of tourism that we all rely on is under threat. So many of these tourism developments are what we've called self-destruct tourism, and Mary mentioned this already, that you have beautiful, beautiful places that once the tourism is installed are no longer beautiful. One of the most famous tourism destinations in North America is Los Cabos, which unfortunately just got wiped by a hurricane. But if you were to look back at the original city plan for Los Cabos, it was going to preserve all of the vistas of Los Cabos and have a green area before there was a promenade, before there was a road, and before there was any infrastructure. And it was mandated that the first row of infrastructure be 1 story tall, then a few blocks back 2 stories tall, almost like a Greek village hillside. If you go there today, you know that you have high-rise on the waterfront blocking everything from sight from everyone else. And we're just destroying these places that were once beautiful. And we underestimate the effects that has on culture, on people, on balance of the systems in these places. So if tourism is incredibly popular, and if it's a gigantic industry, is there a way to do it right? Is there a way to do it sustainably? Can we define success? Can we use the classic definition of sustainability, of the taking care of the present, so that it's also there for future generations in this context? And so that does mean protecting those aesthetics, the vistas, the ecology, the jobs in the economy, the lives of people who are affected by bringing predominantly first world tourists to developing countries. Can we show that kind of consciousness about developing tourism is actually beneficial financially? Can we show that by protecting all of those things, they will be there longer and everyone will benefit from them longer, including the tourism provider? Obviously, we are very involved in oceans, and the idea of all of these businesses, whether they're tourism or otherwise, involved in the ocean. And one of the things that we're working on is some integrated approaches to protection that relate to tourism and fishing, right? So can we think about how a marine protected area that limits overfishing, but supplies local food for tourism operators, and the local tourism operators are committed to sustainability and therefore are supporting the marine protected area and the limitation on fishing, does that three-side triangle actually benefit all three sides? And we think it does, and we think it's improving how these things are going forward and how enforcement happens, right? The best type of enforcement when it comes to fishing is community self-governance. And if everyone sees how the fishing and the marine protected area and tourism benefit, you get somewhere. We're convincing tourism operators to buy locally sourced fish that is artisanal in scale and not gigantic commercial scale production. We are encouraging them to support local fishers and their involvement in marine protection as part of this. And you probably heard earlier from Hoyt, who's working on smart fish, to make sure that the fish is better handled and therefore tastes better, looks better, and is worth more, so that we don't need to take as much out for the fishermen to make a living. I've already mentioned a few things that are on this slide, but the classic definition of sustainable development is ecology, economy, and socio-cultural values. In tourism, we have to think about a fourth leg to that stool, which is aesthetics. How do we protect beauty? If we build something, how do we ensure that it has beauty? If we think about things like Greece, Rome, other places where things have been built and have not been torn down, they have a beauty of proportion, a beauty of style and quality that is lasting. And so we're not wasting the building materials, and we're thinking about the culture and the vernacular of that culture and thinking about how things should look. And I want to encourage everyone, if they're involved in tourism, to think about that fourth leg of sustainable development. We have been involved in a number of projects where there's been a developer creating a resort who wants to make a commitment to sustainability. We did one, for example, in Mexico, in Loreto, and one in St. Kitts, where we worked with the developer to try and help them, right? Convince them that no, they didn't need 3 golf courses. No, they didn't need a high-rise on the beach. No, they didn't need... Actually, these examples were remarkably good ones, and so we tried to work with them to make them even stronger and do some things that gave back to the community. So in the case of Loreto, we received 1% of all revenue from the resort. If you bought a margarita, the Ocean Foundation got 1%. If you bought a condo, the Ocean Foundation got 1%. If you flipped your condo 5 years later, the Ocean Foundation got 1%. It was all built into the deeds and everything else. And so we were able to have a revenue stream that allowed us to provide financial support to the national park, provide them with the resources to enforce the laws, including against the resort for taking out some mangroves. Right? We structured it so it would be independent and able to do its job. We are working with the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, and here I will reinforce what Mary was saying. The travel and tourism industry is so far behind clothing, groceries, all sorts of other sectors of our world in thinking about how to integrate sustainability, how to make things better, how to reduce harm, how to reduce carbon footprint. I mean, even the stuff we've heard in this conference about aviation, right? We are so far behind, it is frightening, right? And then even within the sector, we were the advisors on hotels and resorts because we had experience in that, and then we got asked to look at cruise ships. And if you think hotels and resorts are bad, cruise ships suck. We've been working with JetBlue Airways not to help them, but to ask questions about their destinations in the Caribbean, right? We signed an agreement with them in which we get to look at their internal revenue models and map those against all of their Caribbean destinations, and then map that against which of those destinations have the cleanest beaches, the healthiest mangroves, and the healthiest coral reefs. And lo and behold, it's a nice correlation. The cleaner the beach, the more their revenue. The dirtier the beach, the less revenue they have. Okay? Now, we have a lot more work to do over the next few months to determine whether that's statistically significant or not, but we're beginning to see a picture that these natural amenities actually have value that can be shown on the books of even a traditional air carrier. And then we're working with the United Nations on some evaluation stuff, but I'll skip that right now. The resort partners we worked with, we created a foundation. We kept it separate from them, which worked out remarkably well even for them, right? When the mayor said, hey, my kids could really use new uniforms for their soccer team, the resort developer, oh, and by the way, I'm reviewing your permits this week. The resort developer could say, go talk to Mark at the foundation. And we could decide, you know, in a separate, transparent way how that happened and avoid petty corruption while we were doing all the other things we were trying to accomplish with this. We therefore did grant making in the community from the resort to benefit the local nonprofits, the national park, et cetera. We also acted as a facilitator to make sure all stakeholders were consulted in times they needed to be consulted. And as I mentioned earlier, we gave advice. And we also looked at what was going on. We paid attention. It happened that when I was practicing law, I wrote a textbook on Mexican labor law. And when I saw what the labor camps looked like to build the resort, I said, wait a minute, need to do some changes here. And that's something that a third party who is independent can bring to these kinds of arrangements. So one hopes that if you can engage with travel and tourism destinations, whether it's an individual resort or at a community-wide basis, you can do things that protect the culture, protect the environment, save water, reduce energy, et cetera, all things that we would all list as good things from a sustainability standpoint, but they become even more important when that community is dependent or has been made dependent, as Mary was implying, by the World Bank or anyone else, on travel and tourism for their economy. Because if that beach becomes degraded, you've got a problem. Part of this is the enemy of sustainability is scale. The bigger the scale, whether it's the number of airplanes that are being sold, the size of the resort, the number of resorts, that's where the tipping point always takes place. If we can figure out how to reduce density, reduce quantity, reduce the number of visitors, frankly, that's how we maintain some of these protections. And that's the hardest part, because once the tourism engine starts going, as we saw in Los Cabos, it just keeps going. And the more money flows in, more things happen. Costa Rica, your example, you know, I think it was because it got on the map as such a great destination with great reputation that everybody and their brother decided, oh, well, we should have a Sheraton there and a Marriott and a this and that. And then bang, it's not so good anymore. And so understanding how that short-term reduction in economic opportunity pays off in the medium and long term is what we have to get across. If we, think about, again, I'll use the example of Costa Rica, part of the attraction was there was one airport, and it was slow travel to get to any of the coast and beaches in Costa Rica, and it became part of the experience. So what's been done? Build 2 new gigantic international airports and high-speed freeways and da-da-da-da-da. You don't experience Costa Rica on the way to the beach anymore. You don't see that this country is blessed with rainforests and all sorts of other things besides the all-inclusive resort that you've paid everything in advance and all things are taken care of for you and you don't have to see anyone or touch anything or be touched by anyone. Again, using the Loretto example, the developer had a great vision for what they wanted to achieve in the way of sustainability, and this 1% in between 2004 and 2009 produced $1 million for a community of about 3,500 people. It meant that we could support spaying and neutering clinics, to sea turtle research programs, to uniforms for the national park in a way that made a difference in the community. The community hated the national park. It was imposed upon them by a presidential decree. It prohibited them from fishing. It was getting people in trouble. And now it is the pride of the community. It is what brings people to the community. It's what they're connected to. So if scale is the enemy, the opportunity is replication. If we can do some of these things at the right scale, small scale, and do them well and have them be sustainable, how can we replicate the positive aspects of those? How can we replicate these things that work and that we see are sustainable, learning lessons from one place and sharing them in another, unless we make the same mistakes over and over again, right? The Center for Responsible Travel made a film called The Golden Egg, which gives you the lessons, the bad lessons of Costa Rica's excessive development after it reached its peak of ecotourism and began its downward slide. We don't want all the lessons to be Costa Rica gone bad, Los Cabos gone bad, et cetera. We want some of the lessons to be the positive ones, and we can find these and we can figure out how to share them. And I think Mary was sharing a handful of those. Mary mentioned certification. I won't repeat a lot of what she said, but I'm going to just give one example. There's a tremendous amount of tourism in Aruba, and the government there has basically asked all of their hotels to get Green Globe certification because the Americans recognize it, and ISO 14001 certification because the Europeans recognize it. So they're going through 2 entirely separate certification programs so that they can show both, right? From some of the hoteliers there, they don't see it as wasteful because it's bringing in enough revenue. But boy, it sure seems like the GSTS and various other things have got to be ramped up so that we're doing this in a way that is rational and can form at least a baseline that folks can exceed and do more than the simple, I'll be critical of the UN, say it's the lowest common denominator standard, and there are ways to go beyond that standard. And I'll say that Travel Advisor didn't go beyond that standard. I've already mentioned this 4 prongs of sustainable development, so I'll skip over this and say thank you. And we have about 5 or 10 minutes left and are more than happy to answer questions. And there's a mic there in the middle of the room if somebody wants to go up there and ask a question. Miles?
Thanks. I had a question. I see this a lot. So I work as ecotourism development in Texas and other places, take people to Costa Rica. But one of the things I see in sustainability is the difference in impact between investor-owned and owner-operated businesses. And you mentioned it a little bit, but I wonder if you want to comment on models or if that's a factor into certification.
Yeah. I think it is and can be a factor in certification in the following way, which is if the destination is requiring a certification, even the builder developer has to pay attention to that. Our problem is where the builder and developer is completely different from the operator. In the Loretto case, the developer was going to be the operator. In St. Kitts and various other places around the Caribbean, we often see that the developer, their idea is to build it, flip it, and bring in a big chain to run it. And even if the big chain, which I don't see in a lot of the big chains, wants to have high-end environmental components, the developer has no incentive to build those because they're not going to reap the energy savings and cost savings and all that sort of stuff. And that's where there is an incredible role for government to play in making requirements and standards up front so that that doesn't happen. Yeah. Did you wanna-
Hi. Ms. Mulvey, I appreciate actually both of you, what you said. There are a lot of good things going on there. You did pick on travel media to some degree rightly, although it's also, what they print is partly a response to the PR they get from travel marketing organizations like your own. But you picked on people who aren't critical enough. As somebody who has won awards for investigative journalism for my travel reporting, let me point out a couple of the missing pieces in what was said here. The first, which I won't belabor because it was a separate session, is that these certifications you're talking about exclude the biggest piece of the carbon footprint of the trip, the transportation to the destination. And if you have a certification process that will certify what your own slide described as a green trip, not a green destination, but a green trip, but exclude the transport from that, that is a broken, invalid certification process that does not deserve its seal and that has discredited itself with the public. The second thing I would say, which is a little more subtle, is that the problem with these certifications as industry certifications is that they are certifying what you also described, I think, equally problematically, as tourism as a product. Tourism is an experience. It is a thing we do. There are services and products that are sold to people, but you don't buy a trip. You buy some services along the way to enable you to have and experience a trip. And certifications that are put on products are necessarily going to contribute to and certify the commodification of travel, when it is often the least commodified experiences that cannot be certified that are the most sustainable.
Okay, thank you. On your first point, it may be a European thing, but travel media in Europe do not cover responsible tourism issues. There's 2 people who can't make a living in the whole of the UK, and the whole, and it's a living thing and an economic thing. I think all travel writers find it very hard to live, but TBECs, travel bloggers, they don't look at sustainability. You know what I mean? As organizations.
I was at TBEC's last month in Cancun, in a horrible place in Cancun.
Yeah. But people tried to raise the dolphin issue, and it wasn't dealt with.
It was the lead keynote. In response to pressure, not from the organizers of the conference, but from the bloggers who were attending, at the grassroots, the media themselves demanded that it be talked about. You're wrong.
Okay. Well, TBEX came to Dublin and didn't cover sustainability, but some of the bloggers did come to me. Do you know what I mean? So I think, it should be part of all media to cover it, okay? And it ain't happening. Because if everyone, we're reading a lot about food, and we're reading a lot about sustainability and other consumer products, we're not reading about it in tourism. We're not. The second point, we certify ecotourism experiences, Ecotourism Ireland, okay? So it's the whole, everything from once you leave your destination. Our businesses measure their carbon footprint. We're offering the visitors an opportunity to offset and measure their carbon footprint. One of the labels, which was on my third slide, Tour Search in Germany, actually in the brochure offsets and pays for the carbon on each holiday that's there. That's how far it's gone in Europe as such. So the opportunity is there. We're asking a very small business in the west of Ireland to measure their carbon footprint and to offer their visitor to do that. They're also offering them, the visitor, an opportunity to pay back to conservation and all the things in a practical way that visitors are ever asked to do, to leave something behind, to contribute to something. You know, don't just go to a craft shop. You know what I mean? Actually leave something from a community behind. So I think for a lot of visitors, it is a new concept as well. Do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people, you know what I mean? I was at ITB Berlin last year, 400 stands in a responsible tourism hall, but there's 300 countries at the exhibition. I couldn't get my own country to come down and look at it. Okay? So there's huge issues on both sides, but if we continually knock initiatives that are trying to get us somewhere. When FSC started 22 years ago, everyone thought everyone was raving loonies at FSC level trying to do something about rainforests. But now FSC is a standard and a brand, something where you respect. It's not perfect. I'm voluntary on FSC as well. No systems are perfect. But at least if we're all part of them, we can make them change. You know what I mean?
And I want to point out that, you know, there are actually two different major types of certification: product certification and process certification.
Yeah.
And this is where, you know, ISO 14001 is an example. If it's applied, it is a certification of a process. So it is beyond just the product or service that you're paying for from the tourism provider. It therefore gives us a tool to hold those who are seeking certification under that process certification to a continual improvement standard, right? You don't reach gold level. You reach a level, and then you have new requirements to continually improve. And I think that is something we've studied together with the Environmental Law Institute to determine which ones of these certifications are real and which ones of them are empty, which ones of them have third-party certifiers like Ecotourism Ireland, which ones are industry shams, which ones have governance bodies that have multi-stakeholder representation like the Forest Stewardship Council, and which ones do not, like the Marine Stewardship Council. How do we get through this maze? And this is part of where I want to get to, and I think you know, I'll join you strongly in saying, if we're going to say a trip is green, it had better count on whether I left all the lights on at home so that it looks like somebody's there, how I got to the airport, whether I took a plane or some other transport, whether I offset my carbon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to completely agree with you on that. And there is not, you're correct, a certifier out there who is looking at that entire arc at this time. And I think there should be, and I think there could be. And I don't see why over time we can't develop that. So thanks. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, I wondered if you guys could comment on the business viability of some of these new operations. So I've seen, you know, in Bermuda, an eco resort that was fabulous, lasted about 5 years, and I'm seeing that in some other places. So how are they holding up? How are they compared to some of the conventional business models?
Just give the Irish example. Most of them are very, very small enterprises, but I've one new organic hotel, 14, 15 bedrooms, that is doubling the rates it's getting for an organic wedding to a normal hotel. They've less costs. Anyone who's doing a sustainability project or operation have far less running costs. So, you know what I mean, they're already at an advantage. They've less waste. They've all the inputs are less. I'm only seeing success at the moment. Do you know what I mean? Because it's a very loyal customer. And I've heard the term that an eco customer is 4 times more loyal. I think you have to really look at the depth of what is sustainability. Is it just a sign at the gate of this resort? Do you know what I mean? Or is it really something meaningful? Do you know what I mean? Both for the guest. I'll give you a very good example in Cornwall, the Scarlet Hotel, a luxury, high-end hotel that you can't get into for the last 2 years. Built by 2 sisters whose parents had a traditional hotel, and they worked with every imaginable concept, from happiness to happy staff to happy everyone living there and working there. And, they respect local culture. They bring people on seaweed walks. You know what I mean? They're doing something different. So I would say the hotel or the resort who do your standard hotel is no different as a green experience to me. It's what's the enriching experience, what you bring home, and how you connect with a destination after. And they're the type of people we work with, you know what I mean, that are smaller scale. But I'm hearing lots and lots of other potential bigger projects. We have a big castle in Ireland, Ashford Castle. It was traditionally owned by investors. We have a new South African owners now, the Red Carnation Hotel Group, and they're now looking at every conceivable local community benefit from a visitor to that hotel. So it can be done if there's trust at the destination. And I think for a lot of tourism projects, I'll never forget being on a beach in Cuba one time, and we were with the Eco operator, so we couldn't get into the big resort. And this particular tourist was so pissed off because she couldn't get Coke and she couldn't get this and she couldn't get that. And I said, well, maybe you feel now how a local feels in some of these places. And I think, there are good reasons sometimes that, if the local community is not benefiting, it won't be a long-term viable solution, I don't think. Because, again, I think destinations and media love new destinations, and people move on and move on and move on, that the life cycle of destinations, that there is an expiry date, there's a sell-by date on tourism.
And I'll just add to that, since we're at the end of our time. It's how real is it, right? You have a lot of greenwashing, a lot of folks who put the word eco on their lodge, green on their building, et cetera, and it's not real. And so figuring out how to parse out the ones that are real, authentic, engaging with community and the like, and then asking the question, how successful are they? My perception is that they are remarkably successful because the costs are lower and the support of the community is there. That certainly would be my experience in the places we have worked and worked with others. But it's hard to simply answer that question in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think it's...
I think also sometimes green people are very creative people, like artists and food people, and they're hard to deal with, and they think green is the only reason someone's going to come. But I'm saying your customer care has to be good, your business model has to be good, your pricing has to be good. All the other business factors are probably as more important, because in our training we do lots and lots of exercises with people's knowledge of their own green economy stuff. And you're saying, well, you're telling me you want to attract a green tourist, but you're not very sure about all these other, green things. So in the consumer marketplace, people are very confused. So if you want to come to the Wild Atlantic Way, do you want to come when it's a little busier, or do you want to come in November, or do you want to come, you know what I mean? People need to have a product when people want them, and timing. And I think the model of tourism has been too much high season, high peak, you close down, you go away, where, for a lot of these communities, to have long-term tourism benefits, it needs to be all year round. It needs to, have a four-season experience.
All right.
Are we trying to wrap up here?
Yeah, we're a few minutes over our time. Thank you all very much for
Thank you very much.
being here and staying to the end.
If anyone wants just a postcard, we have a lot of resources on our website. We would really specialize in education and training if people want to learn more. Okay. Thank you.